And Vince, they left these wonderful vehicles on stage.
Yeah, they don't know this, but I'm actually taking this back to Toronto after.
Okay.
So.
How do you feel when you come to Europe, coming from Toronto?
Yeah, I'm super jealous. Like we don't have the kind of cycling infrastructure in Toronto that exists here. Obviously, not a lot of places do, but I mean, in most places in Europe, we spent a lot of time in London as well, and even London, I felt spoiled. Like we just don't get that in Toronto. So yeah, really excited to be here.
Well, and that is really the reason you're here. You're a Micromobility founder. Tell us about Joyride for all the folks who don't know about it. Take me back to when you founded a company. You started at Y Combinator, right? Or
not Y Combinator, but we
Combinator.
started in 2014,
Okay.
quite some time ago. Yeah, I started the company as like our vision is to bring sustainable transportation to every city in the world. And there are over 10,000 cities that can support shared micromobility. So bikes, scooters, mopeds. And it's kind of silly to think that one company can do all of that on their own. And so what we do is we work with really amazing entrepreneurs who have that same shared vision as us, as to make the world a better place and to bring more sustainable transportation to their cities. And we, with our platform, we enable them to bring lightweight electric vehicles, shared bikes, shared scooters, into their communities.
So our session is dramatically named David versus Goliath. Tell me about the Davids that Joyride helps establish sustainable businesses and drive the micromobility revolution across the world.
Yeah, so we all know the Goliaths in the space. There's a handful of them, but there's so many more Davids in micromobility. Most people, they're aware of like the big players in the space. If you go to a major city, you'll see a number of one of the 4 or 5 that exist. But there, like I said, there's over 10,000 markets all around the world, tier 2, tier 3 cities, where the smaller operators can exist and thrive in those markets.
And when you say tier 2 and tier 3 city, can you clarify what you mean?
Yeah, it can be a city with 30,000 people, 50,000 people, and they launch maybe 50 or 100 vehicles. They don't need to put 2,000 scooters in a city scattered across all the sidewalks. They can do it in a much smaller way.
Your origin story, though, is really interesting because from what I understand, Joyride started just as a passion project for you to figure out what is going on when more people bike.
Yeah.
And then you unlocked the insights and through the data that you collected that was really helpful for others, like cities.
Yeah, it was a passion project. And so, as a startup, all startups kind of have their pivot. But really in 2014, as a cyclist in Toronto, I was just really trying to find a way to help the city understand where other cyclists like myself were riding so they can build better cycling infrastructure. And the naive person that I am thought the only thing that cities needed was more data. And once they had the data, of course they would build the cycling infrastructure. Well, it doesn't necessarily work that way. But I built some tracking devices that myself and a couple others would put on their bikes, and we started collecting data about where other people were riding their bike. And it turned out to be a really interesting solution for shared mobility. Now, at that time, shared mobility was really just docked bike sharing. And so we started working with some big bike sharing companies in Canada and the UK, and started to get some really interesting insights. We then launched our own dockless bike sharing system in London, and it was with the software that we built and the platform that we had that other entrepreneurs started reaching out and saying, hey, we'd love to bring that model into other cities around the world. And so we just started putting other people on our platform, like kind of like as a shared responsibility to help transition cities into more sustainable transportation.
And what are the biggest hurdles that operators have when they come to Joyride that they ask you to solve for them?
Yeah, it's really interesting because at first people would come to us and they'd say, hey, can you help us out with an app? Like we need an app to connect to our scooters or connect to our bikes. Now, and that has more or less evolved into, hey, what are the best vehicles that I can put out into the market? What are the best manufacturers to work with? How do I get financing? Financing 100 scooters can be really expensive. Like that's not cheap.
Can you give like a rough number what that looks like?
Yeah, usually we say, it always depends on the volume, it depends on the manufacturers out there, so we've got all our friends out here today, so I'm not going to speak for them, but I would say just ballpark if you're doing back of the napkin stuff, like any entrepreneur should to start off, just mark maybe like €1,000 or $1,000 landed per vehicle, and that should kind of cover it. So that's not cheap, right? So you need those vehicles. You need that capital to actually get those vehicles out onto the market before you do anything, before you make any hiring, before you get a warehouse, before you buy spare parts, before you account for charging, and then things like insurance. Insurance is extremely hard to get. And some of the Goliaths have tried to make it even more challenging for the Davids to even get insurance. And so what we do is we partner with some really good insurance companies in the United States and in Europe to help the smaller operators get better pricing on their insurance. And even then, it can still be expensive. So now you need financing for your vehicles, you need some financing for your insurance. It's not always the cheapest proposition. It's not like starting maybe a drop ship t-shirt company. There is some capital involved, but we can help with that. And so we've started to launch some services. Like now we even help our operators with financing of the vehicles. So if you've been working with us and you need more vehicles to deploy into a market, we have some really good insights and we can partner with you. We're in a better position to know how well your business is run, better than your bank will. And I hate banks. Sorry if there's any bankers out there. Never been able to get a loan for my business from a bank. So I totally understand and I can sympathize with any other entrepreneur out there. Work with us. We'll help you finance your vehicles and get them out into the market. So things like that.
And so it's one thing to start a business and finance the go-to-market. It's another thing to make it sustainable and make a living for yourself, for your employees, and the community. When the pandemic broke out, we've all seen the headlines of Goliaths pulling out of certain markets. But you also have stories of small operators adapting quickly, finding the opportunity where previously there was a sense of loom. So what is a resilient small operator, or what needs to happen for operators to become resilient businesses?
Yeah, it's a great question. And because we work with entrepreneurs, and all the entrepreneurs out there, you know how resilient you are and how easy it is for you to pivot, especially if you're a smaller business. And so because we've built a platform that can accommodate all different business types, it's not just the public sharing, but it could also be private sharing. We've had operators who are very easily able to pivot into new business models like delivery and start offering their vehicles to delivery companies, offer vehicles for subscription, long-term leasing for their customers, pivot into providing a service just for campuses or maybe hotels or work with development properties.
Right? The
and hospitals, exactly, yeah. During COVID, we had a number of operators who were offering their vehicles and services to healthcare workers during COVID, yeah.
Incredible. There was a question from the audience, and by the way, if you're not using the app, I highly recommend it. You can come into the session and ask Vince questions through the app. But we had a question from an audience member earlier who asked, what are the economics to reach profitability by usage type? And where is there a diminishing return with increased scale, that sweet spot where the opportunity really lies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't mean this as a cop-out, but immediately right after this, in like 5 minutes, we have the Joyride Academy experience that we're launching here in partnership with Micromobility, where it's a 2-hour operator workshop where we've brought in industry experts on the financing side, on the operation side, on the insurance side, to come answer all those types of questions and showcase all the best products and services other smaller operators can use to scale faster than the Goliaths. So that's just over there on the right hand, or your left, my right. It's like you go upstairs, and it's a big room, and I would definitely recommend, even if you're not an operator, to go check out what other experts in the industry are saying and how to become profitable, because what we've seen is these bigger markets are those cash cows where those Goliaths are losing money. It's the tier 2, tier 3 markets where you can be profitable as a smaller operator.
Another question will be answered in the Joyride Academy. How fast can I get started with Joyride? So if you're in the audience, you ask this question. Vince will answer that in the Joyride Academy.
How fast can you get started? Let's sign up today. Let's go.
A couple of more audience questions that are really interesting. One is there really end brand loyalty in e-scooter or e-bike usage?
Yeah, so we've seen a bunch of studies, and what we've seen is generally people will rent the scooter that's closest to them. Outside of that, from what we've heard from our operating partners, is that the local brand will win because people want to stay loyal to their local provider. And so if you're in Europe and your options are a local company from Rotterdam or a company from San Francisco, your heart and maybe your wallet are probably going to tell you which operator to use. And you might want to be loyal to the company who speaks that local language.
Well, and to that point, we have another question that says, would the big players buy the smaller ones? My kind of reverse order is, would the smaller players want to be acquired by the big guys?
We haven't seen, since we started deploying this product and this solution, this platform, back in 2017, and launching small micromobility businesses all around the world, and we have operators in over 200 markets all around the globe, that's not something that we've seen. Very infrequently, it doesn't really happen, and a lot of the Goliaths have even said, this is not part of our plan to go out and acquire a lot of operators. It's not really a scalable thing. What actually makes more sense is by being an operator and being within the Joyride community, a lot of our operators actually work and network together to find out the best tips and tricks of how to scale their business profitably. So you could work with one of the big players, or you could work with 100 other smaller operators and actually scale even faster.
Really interesting. And for the end, I think we're at the end of the session, so just one quick fire question is, can the Davids lead the micromobility revolution?
I think the Davids are leading the micromobility revolution. They're the ones who are out there working with some really cool vehicles out there in the market. Like, you have the opportunity to scale and pivot faster than the bigger companies out there. There's some really cool products that we integrate with regularly that you can start deploying in different markets all around the globe. So if you want to deploy in multiple countries, multiple languages, multiple currencies, super easy to do that with us. And you can do that in a matter of a couple of weeks. We help you get launched, and it's the smaller operators who are able to move faster than the bigger ones.
Amazing mission. Thank you so much, Vince. We'll, follow your journey and cheer along. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marija.